Hey guys, not quite a review on the Across the Spider-Verse movie, but more of a critique. Now, there are 1.5 billion reviews on this movie, and from what I was gathering, this was one of the greatest movies ever. I mean, I had a friend of mine tell me that this was in the top 5 movies of all time. So when I went to see this, I had some high expectations. And I had some pros here, but then I also noticed some cons, and I was wondering why no one would notice these. So I wanted to make a video to see if anyone noticed some of the things in this movie. This is going to be minimal spoilers. Now, aside from the runtime being well over 2 hours, 2 hours and 16 minutes is a little bit long, but they do it for a reason. This story is actually much different than the first movie. The first movie was more of a generic kind of plot where you've got the origin story, you've got the main conflict, and then you have ways to solve that conflict for each of the main characters. But in this movie, the plot is all but simple. In fact, it's rather convoluted. That's the part that I wanted to talk about. Anyone who knows stories knows that plot goes like this. You introduce your characters and settings, you have an initial conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, then the resolution. While you can mix things up and throw a couple of monkey wrenches in there, this is basically how plot goes. And in the first movie, they do this perfectly. They introduce their characters and settings, they introduce their problems, and by the end of the movie, those problems are resolved. This movie decided to take a different route. Now, I understand that this is supposed to be a sequel, but it's also supposed to be a part of another movie. So the problems are not going to be resolved. That's fair. What's not fair is the amount of conflict in this movie and the way that they refuse to resolve any of it. It might be best to explain it this way. Whenever you create movies that have sequels planned out already, the writers are taking huge risks, and time has shown that those risks often do not pay off. Take the original trilogy of The Matrix. In the first movie, they had conflict, and by the end, the conflict was resolved. But problem, you still have 2 more movies that need to be made. So the second and third movie actually feel disconnected from the first because they introduce all kinds of problems that were never even heard of in the first movie. Across the Spider-Verse does the same exact thing that The Matrix did way back then. So what did they do? How did they overcomplicate this plot? Well, the first thing that they did was actually start their movie off not with Miles Morales, but Gwen. Now, we know that Gwen was still having issues with her dad having the manhunt because of the accidental death of Peter Parker in her universe. However, because the plot truly needs it, some Spider-Men from like some Time Patrol from Dragon Ball Xenoverse, they show up and it ends up so bad that Gwen has to leave her dimension and go join them. And it's actually so convenient to the plot that it's not exactly believable, to the point of Gwen falling in love with this Time Patrol during the battle, and then she runs out of webs, something that no Spider-Man does in this entire movie. But in this scene in the beginning, she runs out of webs so that when she's approached by her father, she ends up having it so bad that she has to leave and go with these Time Patrol spider people. Now, that took a solid 10 to 15 minutes of runtime. When you use that much runtime to talk about a character, you would think that that is actually the protagonist, but she's not. What they do then is they restart the movie over and do another introduction to give us time to talk about Miles Morales. And the movie takes a very long time to explain basically the same exact problems as Gwen. He is having issues telling his parents about his secret life. So you have an individual versus self conflict, and they took entirely too long to do that. But now you have the main villain enter, or so we think, in Spot. And Spot wants Spider-Man to take him serious, but Spider-Man can't do that because he has this individual versus self conflict going on. So I ask, what is the main problem? Is it the individual versus self conflict, or is it the individual versus another individual conflict? We don't know because they take up time for both. In order to not reveal too much of the plot, you've got a big multiverse thing going on here. You've got thousands of Spider-Men. They make all types of quips and references so that people who understand those references would get a kick out of it. However, Then they introduce another problem. I mean, we are over an hour into this film, and yet another conflict arises that is now taken over the main conflict. There's 3 intros.
I'm in a loop. I'm caught in a time loop. This is exactly where it all went wrong.
I know.
Miles Morales now has to break free of fate. We've seen it done before with The Matrix, where Neo goes against the Architect. Neo is the one. He's a big anomaly. Guess what? Miles Morales is the one. He's an anomaly. And then he breaks out and tries to change his fate. It's the same exact thing as The Matrix Reloaded. So we're winding down now. Is the problem that Miles Morales is lonely? No, he solves that problem supposedly by not wanting to be with the other Spider-Man anymore. Is the problem the Spot? Well, he's taken a missing for a good 45 minutes to an hour. I'm not sure. Is the problem fate? Well, Miles Morales is going to break that fate. And similar, but not quite similar to The Matrix, they pull a twist, because Miles Morales ends up in the wrong dimension and a new villain shows up and captures him, thus leading to his friends needing to rescue him. This is the same thing as The Matrix Reloaded, because Neo ends up in a place to where his friends need to rescue him, but the villain is not actually even fate now. It is a completely different villain that's a twist right at the end. So, is the conflict against himself? Is the conflict against the Spot? Is the conflict against fate? Or is the conflict against this new villain that they introduced 2 minutes before the movie's over, who just so happens to be just like him but is the polar opposite? Which one is it? Don't know. You'll just have to tune in next time to see how each one of these conflicts gets resolved in one movie. I can guarantee you that, like all the other movies that follow this pattern before them, it's going to be longer than each one of them. But hopefully, this new one coming out is not going to be as disappointing as all of its predecessors. That's just something that I noticed in this movie. Did anybody else notice that this is the same exact movie following the same exact formula as the ones that have come before it? If you did, put it in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.